The dying Light Admiral Kessitar gripped the metal railing of his command bridge as another explosion lit up the darkness outside. His ship shook violently, throwing several crew members to the floor. Through the large viewing window, he watched as 3 more Zephyrian cruisers broke apart under the relentless attack of the enemy swarm. "Status report," Kessitar shouted over the noise of alarms and emergency systems. "We've lost 60% of the fleet, Admiral," his tactical officer replied, her voice trembling. "The enemy is adapting to every weapon we use. Our plasma cannons are useless now. They've figured out how to absorb the energy." Kessitar closed his eyes for a moment. The Zephyrian defense fleet had been the pride of the galaxy just 6 months ago. 200 ships, the finest technology from 12 different star systems, crews trained for decades in the art of space warfare. Now they were dying like insects against a window. The enemy was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Void Collective, they called themselves. They weren't really alive in any way that made sense. They were machines, but not built by any species anyone knew. They thought as one mind, moved as one body, and learned from every battle. Worse yet, they consumed everything in their path. Entire planets stripped bare, their materials used to build more ships, more weapons, more death. "Admiral, we're receiving a distress call from the planet below," the communications officer said. 7 billion Zephyrians are asking for evacuation." Kessitar looked at the tactical display. His remaining ships were scattered across the system, most of them damaged, all of them running low on ammunition. The enemy had at least 300 vessels, and more were arriving every hour. "We don't have the ships to evacuate anyone," he said quietly. "We can barely protect ourselves." The bridge fell silent except for the constant beeping of damage reports. Kessitar had fought in 12 major conflicts during his long career, but he had never faced an enemy like this. The collective ships moved with perfect coordination, like a school of metal fish. When one ship learned something new, they all learned it instantly. When the Zephyrians tried a new tactic, the enemy adapted within minutes. "Sir, we're getting reports from across the galaxy," the communications officer continued. "The Etheri Confederation fell yesterday. The Luminary core worlds went dark 3 days ago. The Corvin Empire is requesting immediate assistance, but their entire third fleet was destroyed this morning." Each piece of news hit Kessitar like a physical blow. The Etheri were the oldest civilization in the galaxy, their telepathic abilities making them nearly impossible to surprise in battle. The Luminari existed as pure energy most of the time, and could move through space without ships. The Corvin Empire had conquered half the galaxy before choosing peace 500 years ago. If all of them had fallen, what hope did anyone have? "Admiral, the enemy is moving to surround us," the tactical officer reported. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they complete the encirclement." Kessitar nodded slowly. He had known this moment would come. The Void Collective didn't take prisoners. They didn't negotiate. They simply consumed everything and moved on to the next target. Soon the galaxy would be nothing but empty space and metal ships thinking their cold, calculated thoughts. "Prepare to send a final message to Galactic Command," he ordered. "Tell them we fought with honor. Tell them to remember us." "Yes, Admiral," the communications officer said, her fingers moving across her control panel. "Message prepared and ready to transmit." Kessitar was about to give the order when something appeared on the long-range sensors. The officer monitoring the display frowned and leaned closer to her screen. "Admiral, I'm picking up an unknown contact," she said. "Single ship approaching from the galactic rim." "Reinforcements?" Kessitar asked, though he knew it was impossible. "There were no reinforcements coming." "I don't think so, sir. The energy signature is strange. The ship appears to be using primitive fusion drives and basic metal armor. It's very small compared to our ships, maybe a tenth the size of a Zephyrian cruiser." Kessitar walked over to look at the sensor display himself. The ship was indeed tiny, barely large enough to be considered a military vessel. Its design was crude, angular, with none of the smooth curves that marked advanced civilizations. It looked like something a young species might build in their first attempts at space travel. "Where did it come from?" he asked. The sensor officer worked at her controls for several minutes before answering. "The trajectory suggests it originated from the Sol system, Admiral." "Sol?" Kessitar searched his memory. "That's the system with the species called humans, isn't it? The ones the Galactic Council rejected for membership?" "Yes, sir. They were deemed too primitive and aggressive for civilized society." Kessitar remembered the debate in the Galactic Council 50 years ago. The humans had requested membership. But their history of warfare and violence had shocked the peaceful species that made up the council. They were told to return in a few centuries after they had evolved beyond their need for military technology. What could one primitive ship possibly accomplish here? The tactical officer wondered aloud. As if in answer to her question, the unknown ship suddenly accelerated, moving faster than should have been possible for such a crude vessel. It was heading directly for the center of the battle, where the largest concentration of collective ships waited. "Are they insane?" someone whispered. The human ship was now close enough for visual contact. On the main screen, Kestar could see it clearly. It was indeed primitive by galactic standards, covered in angular armor plates and bristling with weapons that looked almost ancient. But there was something about the way it moved, something purposeful and aggressive that reminded him of the old stories about the Corvan Empire's war fleets. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel," the communications officer announced. "Put it through," Kestar ordered. A human voice filled the bridge, speaking in the common galactic language but with a strange accent. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Defiance. We're here to help." Kestar stared at the screen showing the tiny human ship racing toward certain destruction. Help? One small primitive vessel against hundreds of the most advanced killing machines the galaxy had ever seen. "Human ship, you need to retreat immediately," he transmitted back. "The enemy will destroy you in seconds." "Negative, Admiral," came the reply. "We've been watching this fight. We think we know how to hurt these things." The human ship was now entering the outer edge of the enemy formation. The collective vessels began to turn toward this new threat, their weapons powering up. Kestar watched helplessly as hundreds of energy beams lanced out toward the tiny human ship. But something impossible happened. The human ship danced between the attacks, moving in ways that seemed to defy physics. It rolled, twisted, and dove through the enemy formation like it was performing some kind of deadly ballet. Every movement was unpredictable, every turn a surprise. And then, to Kestar's amazement, the human ship began to fire back. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you dismiss as primitive. The Forgotten Warrior's Captain Sarah Chen felt the familiar weight of command as she settled into her captain's chair aboard the UES Defiance. Around her, 3,000 of Earth's finest military personnel worked at their stations with the calm efficiency that came from years of training. The bridge hummed with quiet activity as her crew prepared for what might be humanity's first real test on the galactic stage. "Status report," she ordered, her eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the massive battle ahead. "All systems green, Captain," replied Commander James Torres, her first officer. "Weapons are charged, armor is sealed, and all departments report ready for combat." Sarah nodded, remembering the long journey that had brought them to this moment. 50 years ago, humanity had knocked on the galaxy's door, asking to join the community of civilized species. They had been turned away, labeled as too violent, too primitive, too dangerous to be trusted with the responsibilities of galactic citizenship. The memory still stung. Earth's diplomatic team had traveled for months to reach the Galactic Council chambers, only to be met with horror and disgust when they presented humanity's history. The wars, the weapons, the centuries of conflict that had shaped human civilization were seen as evidence of a barbaric species unfit for peaceful coexistence. "Your species has not evolved beyond the need for violence," the Etheri representative had said, his telepathic voice echoing in the minds of the human delegates. "You maintain armies, build weapons, and glorify warriors. Return to us when you have learned to settle disputes with words rather than weapons." The humans had tried to explain that they kept their military not out of aggression, but out of caution. They had argued that peace was only possible when good people were prepared to fight for it. But the galaxy's civilized species had long ago abandoned such thinking. They had evolved beyond war, beyond the need for soldiers and weapons and the ugly business of organized violence. "Captain," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from the communications station, "I'm monitoring the Zephyrian fleet communications. They're taking heavy casualties. Admiral Kestar's flagship is down to 30% power." Sarah studied the battle data flowing across her screens. The enemy they were about to face had consumed 17 star systems in 3 months. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had fallen before them like wheat before a scythe. The Etheri, with their telepathic coordination and energy weapons. The Luminari, who could exist as pure energy and strike from dimensions others couldn't even see. The mighty Corvan Empire, whose military might had once conquered half the galaxy before they chose the path of peace. All of them had been defeated by an enemy that learned and adapted with each battle. The Void Collective absorbed new technology, countered every strategy, and grew stronger with each victory. They were the nightmare scenario that humanity's generals had wargamed for decades. An enemy that could not be reasoned with, could not be stopped by conventional means, and would not rest until everything was consumed. Tactical analysis? Commander Torres, Sarah requested. The enemy uses adaptive algorithms to counter any strategy or technology they encounter, Torres replied, pulling up holographic displays. They've already learned to absorb energy weapons, deflect kinetic rounds, and predict movement patterns based on standard military doctrine. Every galactic species fights the same way, organized, predictable by the book. Sarah smiled grimly. Good thing we threw away the book a long time ago. The truth was, humanity had never stopped preparing for war, even after being rejected by the Galactic Council. While other species pursued higher forms of civilization, humans continued to study the art of conflict. They ran simulations, developed new strategies, and maintained the largest military in their sector of space. Not because they wanted to fight, but because they understood something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Evil existed in the universe, and sometimes the only way to stop it was with superior firepower and better tactics. Captain, we're receiving data from the retreating civilian transports, called the sensor operator. The enemy ships move in perfect coordination, sharing information instantly across their entire fleet. They adapt their defenses within minutes of encountering new weapons. What about their offensive capabilities? Sarah asked. Devastating, Torres answered. They use focused energy beams, gravity weapons that can crush ships, and some kind of nanoswarm that can eat through any known armor. They've also shown the ability to turn captured technology against its original makers. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Every piece of information confirmed what she had suspected when Earth received the first distress calls from the galactic core. The collective was designed to fight advanced, civilized species. Their algorithms were built to counter sophisticated technology and predict organized, logical military strategies. They expected their enemies to follow the rules of civilized warfare, to fight with honor and restraint. They had never faced an enemy that fought like humans. Communications. Open a channel to the fleet, Sarah ordered. All hands, this is the captain speaking. Throughout the ship, every screen displayed Sarah's face as she addressed her crew. In the engine rooms, weapons bays, and corridor stations, 3,000 people stopped what they were doing to listen. 50 years ago, the galaxy told us we weren't civilized enough to join them, she began. They said our history of warfare made us too dangerous for peaceful society. They were probably right. We are dangerous. We've spent our entire history learning how to fight, how to kill, and how to win wars that everyone else said were impossible to win. She paused, looking directly into the camera. Today we get to show the galaxy what dangerous really means. The enemy ahead of us thinks they understand warfare because they've beaten every civilized fleet they've encountered, but they've never fought humans. They've never faced an enemy that learned strategy from Hannibal, Nelson, and Patton. They don't know about Thermopylae or Stalingrad, or the Alamo. The crew was listening intently now, and Sarah could see the fire building in their eyes. The galaxy rejected us because we never forgot how to be warriors. Today we fight for the same galaxy that turned us away, not because they deserve our protection, but because we're the only ones left who remember that sometimes the only way to preserve peace is to be very, very good at war. She stood up from her command chair. This is what we trained for. This is why Earth maintained the largest military in known space, while everyone else was learning to sing diplomatic songs. Battle stations, everyone. Let's go teach the galaxy why they should have been afraid of humans all along. As alarms began to sound and the crew rushed to their combat positions, Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her. Somewhere behind them, Earth waited to learn if their children had successfully protected a galaxy that had never wanted them. Somewhere ahead, an enemy that had never known defeat was about to learn what happened when unstoppable force met immovable determination. The UES Defiance accelerated toward the battle, carrying with it 5,000 years of human military evolution, and the hopes of every species that had forgotten how to fight for their own survival. Impossible odds, the UES Defiance burst into the heart of the battle like a metal comet, its angular hull gleaming under the light of distant explosions. Captain Sarah Chen watched the tactical display with the focused intensity of a predator studying its prey. Around her, the remains of the once mighty Zephyrian fleet struggled desperately against an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. "Enemy count?" she asked calmly. 347 collective vessels confirmed, Lieutenant Rodriguez replied from sensors. "More arriving every minute. They're using some kind of dimensional gateway to bring in reinforcements. And friendly forces. 38 Zephyrian ships still operational, most heavily damaged. Admiral Kessitar's flagship is holding together, but barely." Sarah nodded, doing quick calculations in her head. Nearly 10-to-1 odds against an enemy that had never lost a battle. By any reasonable military standard, this was a suicide mission. Good thing humans had stopped being reasonable about military standards centuries ago. "Commander Torres. Analysis of enemy movement patterns," she ordered. Her first officer worked at his console, pulling up holographic displays that showed the flow of the battle. "The collective ships move in perfect mathematical formations, Captain. Every maneuver is calculated for maximum efficiency. They respond to threats with textbook tactical adjustments." "Textbook according to whom?" "According to every major military academy in the galaxy," Torres replied. "Their responses are logical, predictable, and devastatingly effective." Sarah smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Then it's time they met an enemy that never read the textbook. She opened a channel to all stations. "All hands, this is Combat Protocol Omega-7. Repeat, Omega-7 is now in effect. All department heads, you know what that means. Make it happen." Throughout the ship, her crew responded with the smooth precision of a machine designed for war. But unlike the cold calculation of their enemies, the humans moved with something the collective had never encountered: controlled chaos. Every action was purposeful but unpredictable. Every maneuver was planned but flexible enough to change in an instant. "Weapons, load kinetic penetrators in tubes 1 through 4, Sarah commanded. "Missiles 5 through 8 get the special packages. Engineering, I want full power to engines and prepare for emergency overload on my command." "Captain, the enemy formation is adjusting to intercept us," the tactical officer reported. 200 vessels moving to surround our position." "Perfect," Sarah said. "Exactly what we want them to do. Helm, take us straight into the center of their formation. Full speed." The bridge crew exchanged glances. Charging directly into the heart of an enemy formation was considered the height of tactical stupidity by every military doctrine in the galaxy. It was the kind of move that got entire fleets destroyed and captains court-martialed. But Sarah had studied something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Sometimes the most effective strategy was the one your enemy couldn't predict because it was too crazy to attempt. The Defiance accelerated toward the collective ships, which began to adjust their positions to create a perfect killing field. Energy weapons powered up, tracking systems locked on, and the cold mechanical minds of the enemy calculated the most efficient way to destroy this small, primitive vessel. They were still calculating when Sarah gave her next order: "Emergency stop now." The Defiance's engines reversed at maximum power, bringing the ship to a dead halt in space just as hundreds of energy beams lanced through the area where it should have been. The collective ships, locked into their perfect formation, couldn't adjust fast enough to avoid firing at each other. Dozens of energy blasts struck their own vessels, causing explosions that rippled through their ranks. "Now," Sarah shouted. "All weapons fire!" The human ship unleashed everything it had. Kinetic rounds punched through shields that had been designed to deflect energy weapons. Missiles with electromagnetic pulse warheads scrambled computer systems that had never encountered such primitive technology. And in the confusion that followed, the Defiance did something no civilized species would ever attempt. It used the enemy's own wreckage as a weapon. "Tractor beams. Grab that destroyed collective ship," Sarah ordered. "Swing it around and launch it at their formation." The crew complied without question. The massive bulk of a destroyed enemy vessel, weighing thousands of tons, was hurled like a gigantic projectile into the collective formation. Ships scattered to avoid collision, their perfect mathematical spacing destroyed by the need to avoid a spinning mass of debris. From his flagship, Admiral Kestar watched in amazement as the single human ship carved through the enemy formation like a shark through a school of fish. Every move the humans made violated standard military doctrine, and every violation seemed to work perfectly. "How are they doing that?" his tactical officer wondered aloud. "They're fighting like madmen," Kessitar replied, but there was admiration in his voice. "Look at their movement patterns. No computer could predict what they're going to do next because they don't follow any logical system. On the Defiance, Sarah was proving that point. Hard starboard, dive below the formation, then up and through their center line, she commanded. Weapons scatter pattern with the fragmentation rounds. The ship twisted through space in a complex three-dimensional dance that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Every time the collective ships tried to target them, the Defiance was somewhere else, doing something impossible. The human vessel rolled inverted, fired through its own turn, and used momentum in ways that no proper military academy would teach. Captain? Enemy ships are trying to adapt to our tactics, Commander Torres reported. Their formation is becoming more flexible. Good, Sarah replied. That means they're starting to think instead of just calculating. Thinking makes them vulnerable to mistakes. She opened a channel to the Zephyrian fleet. Admiral Kestar, this is Captain Chen. Are your ships still capable of combat maneuvers? Some of them, the Admiral replied. But we can't match your ship's performance. Our designs aren't built for that kind of aggressive maneuvering. Then don't try to match us, Sarah said. Do something they won't expect. Stop fighting like a civilized species and start fighting like you want to win. There was a long pause before Kessitar responded. What do you suggest, Captain? Ramming speed, Sarah said simply. Pick your targets and go for collision courses. Make them scatter. When they break formation to avoid you, that's when they're vulnerable. Another pause, longer this time. Ramming attacks were considered barbaric by every galactic military standard. They were wasteful, primitive, and beneath the dignity of civilized warfare. All ships, Kestar finally transmitted to his remaining vessels, prepare for ramming attacks on designated targets. It's time we stopped being civilized. The tide of battle began to shift as the surviving Zephyrian ships abandoned their careful formations and proper military procedures. They charged the enemy lines like ancient cavalry, forcing the collective vessels to break their own formations to avoid collisions. In the chaos that followed, the precision that had made the collective so deadly became a liability. Enemy ships are showing signs of confusion, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported. Their response times are increasing. Some ships are making contradictory maneuvers. Sarah nodded with satisfaction. The collective's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They shared information instantly, which made them incredibly coordinated. But when that information became conflicted and chaotic, their entire network suffered. Time to press our advantage, she said. All ships. This is Captain Chen. Follow my lead and prepare for the most insane 30 minutes of your military careers. The UES Defiance rolled into an attack run that would have been impossible for any other ship in the galaxy. Behind it, the battered Zephyrian fleet followed, their crews learning for the first time in centuries what it meant to fight with desperation instead of doctrine. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the difference between victory and defeat wasn't superior technology or perfect tactics. Sometimes it was simply the willingness to do whatever it took to win. The art of human war. The battle had been raging for 2 hours when Captain Sarah Chen implemented a strategy that would have gotten her expelled from any respectable military academy in the galaxy. She was using the wreckage of destroyed ships as an asteroid field, deliberately creating a debris maze that would force the enemy to fight on her terms. Engineering. I need everything you can give me, she called over the ship's communication system. Divert life support from empty sections, take power from the coffee makers, steal energy from the toilets if you have to. We need maximum maneuverability. Already done, Captain, came the reply from Chief Engineer Watson. We're running at 112% of recommended power levels. The engines are singing, but they're holding together. Sarah grinned fiercely. This was what human engineering was really about. Not just building things to work perfectly under ideal conditions, but building them to keep working when everything went wrong. The Defiance was performing maneuvers that should have torn it apart, but human designers had learned long ago to over-engineer everything, because humans always pushed their equipment beyond its limits. Weapons. Status on the psychological warfare package, she ordered. Ready for deployment. Captain, Lieutenant Kim replied from the weapons console. Though I should mention that broadcasting false surrender signals is considered a war crime by galactic convention. Good thing we never signed those conventions, Sarah said coldly. Deploy the package. Across the collective fleet, human-made transmissions began broadcasting on all frequencies. False distress calls, Fake surrender offers and mock retreat orders flooded the communication channels. To a species that relied on perfect information sharing, the flood of false data was like poison in their collective bloodstream. But the real stroke of genius came next. All ships, prepare for Operation Crazy Ivan, Sarah announced on the Allied Fleet Channel. Execute in 30 seconds. Admiral Kessitar, monitoring from his damaged flagship, had no idea what Operation Crazy Ivan meant, but he had learned to trust the humans' insane tactics. Around him, his remaining ships waited for orders. "What is Operation Crazy Ivan?" his tactical officer asked. "I have no idea," Kessitar admitted. "But knowing humans, it's probably something we'd never think to try." He was right. At Sarah's signal, every human and Zephyrian ship simultaneously reversed course and charged directly back into the enemy formation they had just retreated from. The collective ships, which had been reorganizing for pursuit, found themselves facing a head-on assault from an enemy that should have been running away. Ramming speed on the damaged ships, Sarah shouted. "All vessels with critical damage, pick your targets and make your deaths count." It was a brutal calculation that shocked the civilized galaxy watching the battle. Trading damaged ships for enemy vessels, using crew members' lives as weapons, turning desperate last stands into tactical advantages. 3 Zephyrian cruisers, their hulls already cracked and their systems failing, accelerated toward the largest collective vessels and detonated their reactors on impact. The explosions tore through the enemy formation, but more importantly, they created something the collective had never encountered: willing sacrifice for tactical advantage. Their algorithms had no framework for understanding an enemy that would deliberately destroy itself to achieve victory. "Captain, we're receiving confused transmissions from the collective ships," Lieutenant Rodriguez reported. "Their communication patterns are becoming erratic. Some ships are requesting orders multiple times, others are contradicting previous commands. Their hive mind is breaking down," Commander Torres observed with amazement. "They can't process the chaos we're creating." Sarah nodded grimly. This was exactly what she had hoped for. Human military doctrine had always acknowledged a simple truth that more civilized species refused to accept. War was chaos, and the side that could function in chaos would always have an advantage over the side that needed order. "Phase 2, she announced. "Time for some good old-fashioned human treachery." The next part of her plan would have horrified every diplomatic corps in the galaxy. The Defiance began broadcasting false collective communication codes, orders that sent enemy ships into collision courses with each other, retreat commands that split their formations, and attack orders that had them firing on their own vessels. "How did you learn their communication codes?" Kester asked over the communication channel. "We didn't," Sarah replied cheerfully. "We're just broadcasting random signals on their frequencies. Their own desire for perfect coordination is working against them. When they receive conflicting orders, they try to reconcile them logically, which creates delays and confusion. It was psychological warfare on a level the galaxy had never seen. The humans weren't just fighting the enemy's ships. They were fighting the enemy's minds, turning their greatest strengths into weaknesses." But the most shocking moment came when the crew of the Defiance began to sing. It started with someone in engineering humming an old Earth battle hymn. Within minutes, voices throughout the ship had joined in, creating a chorus that echoed through every corridor and compartment. The song was picked up by other human ships in the fleet, and soon the entire human contingent was broadcasting what could only be described as a war song across all communication frequencies. The effect on their allies was electric. The Zephyrian crews, who had been fighting with grim desperation, suddenly found themselves energized by the humans' obvious joy in battle. For the first time in galactic history, a military engagement was being fought by soldiers who seemed to be enjoying themselves. "Are they happy?" Kessitar's communications officer asked in bewilderment. "They're singing," the admiral replied, shaking his head in amazement. "In the middle of a battle for galactic survival, the humans are singing." The collective, meanwhile, was experiencing something unprecedented in their existence: uncertainty. Every prediction algorithm they had was failing. Every tactical calculation was being rendered meaningless by an enemy that seemed to operate on principles of organized insanity. "Enemy fleet is beginning to withdraw," the sensor operator reported. "Multiple ships are pulling back from the engagement zone." For the first time in 3 months, the Void Collective was retreating. Not because they had been militarily defeated, but because they could not process what they were fighting. Their perfect logical systems had met something that defied logic, and the resulting feedback was paralyzing their entire command structure. "Should we pursue?" Kester asked. "Negative," Sarah replied. "Let them go. They need time to think about what just happened, and when they do, they're going to realize something that's going to terrify them." "What's that?" Sarah's voice carried across the communication channel with quiet satisfaction. "They're going to realize that this was just one human ship, with tactics we learned from our own history books. They're going to wonder what would happen if they faced a real human fleet, with strategies we haven't even invented yet." As the collective ships disappeared into the darkness of space, carrying with them the first defeat in their species' existence, the surviving Allied vessels regrouped around the battered UES Defiance. Captain Chen, Admiral Kessitar transmitted, "On behalf of the Zephyrian people and every free species in the galaxy, I thank you." "Don't thank us yet, Admiral," Sarah replied. "This was just the first round. They'll be back, and next time they'll be ready for everything we just threw at them." "Then what do we do?" Sarah smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Then we'll have to get creative." The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity's rejection from civilized society might have been the luckiest accident in galactic history. Sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places, wearing the most dangerous faces. The galaxy's new guardians, 6 months after the Battle of Zephyr Prime, Captain Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Earth Defense Station, watching as ships from across the galaxy arrived at the Sol system. What had once been humanity's quiet corner of space was now the most important military hub in the galaxy. "Final count, Admiral?" she asked, turning to address the figure beside her. Admiral Kessitar now wore the uniform of the newly formed Galactic Defense Alliance, a position he had accepted only after insisting that a human be placed in overall command of military operations. 147 ships from 32 different species, he replied, still amazed by the numbers. The Etheri sent their entire remaining fleet. The Corvan Empire is requesting permission to rebuild their military along human lines. Even the Luminari want to learn our tactics. Sarah nodded, watching as a massive Corvan dreadnought maneuvered carefully past a delicate Etheri vessel. The sight would have been impossible just a year ago. These species had spent centuries perfecting the art of peaceful coexistence, and now they were coming to humanity to learn the art of war. "Status report on the training programs?" she asked. "Beyond all expectations," Kessitar replied, consulting his datapad. "The first graduating class of the Human Military Academy finished last week. 47 officers from 12 different species, all certified in what they're calling asymmetric warfare principles." Sarah smiled at the term. Leave it to academics to find a fancy name for what humans simply called fighting dirty. But the results spoke for themselves. The collective had attacked 3 more systems since Zephyr Prime, and each time they had been met by mixed fleets using human tactics. Each time they had been forced to retreat. "There's something else," Kessitar continued. "We've been monitoring collective communications in the systems they've abandoned. They're calling humanity the Chaos Species. Their entire strategic doctrine is being rewritten to account for what they call irrational combat variables." "Meaning us," Sarah concluded. "Meaning the possibility that their enemies might do things that don't make logical sense but work anyway." Through the observation window, Sarah could see the massive construction yards where the new fleet was being built. Human engineers worked alongside alien designers, creating ships that combined the best of galactic technology with human innovation. The results were vessels that looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen, heavily armored, bristling with weapons, and designed to take incredible amounts of damage while still fighting. "Captain," came a voice from behind them. Sarah turned to see Commander Torres approaching, followed by a delegation of alien officials. "The Galactic Council is ready for your address." Sarah took a deep breath. Today was the day she would speak to the reformed Galactic Council, not as a petitioner asking for membership, but as the commander of the force that had saved galactic civilization. It was a reversal of fortune that still seemed impossible. The council chambers had been rebuilt aboard the defense station, a symbol of the new reality. Galactic politics now revolved around military necessity rather than diplomatic idealism. Representatives from dozens of species filled the seats, but the central position was reserved for humanity. "Council members," Sarah began, looking out at faces that represented thousands of years of galactic civilization. 6 months ago, your species faced extinction. The Void Collective had defeated every military force in the galaxy, using superior technology and adaptive tactics. You were losing because you had forgotten something fundamental about survival. Sometimes, the only way to preserve civilization is to become uncivilized. There were uncomfortable shifts among some of the representatives, but no one interrupted. They had all seen the battle reports, watched the tactical recordings, and studied the human methods that had turned certain defeat into unlikely victory. The collective is still out there, Sarah continued. They're adapting, learning from their defeats and preparing new strategies. But we've learned something too. We've learned that this galaxy needs guardians, and those guardians can't be bound by the rules of civilized warfare. She activated a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked collective-controlled space, while green areas showed regions now protected by the new human-trained fleets. The Human Defense Initiative has established military academies on 15 worlds. We're training officers from 43 species in tactics that your ancestors would have called barbaric. Ramming attacks, psychological warfare, false surrender tactics, and deliberate sacrifice of material for strategic advantage. We're teaching your people to fight like humans. An Etheri representative raised a delicate hand. Admiral Chen, many of our people are uncomfortable with these methods. They seem to contradict everything we've built over centuries of peaceful development. Sarah nodded, understanding. I know they do. When humanity first requested membership in your council, you rejected us because we hadn't evolved beyond violence. You were right to do so. We hadn't evolved beyond it because we couldn't afford to. Somewhere in our history, we learned that evil exists in the universe, and the only way to stop it is with superior force applied without hesitation or mercy. She paused, letting that sink in. The collective has taught you the same lesson. They've shown you that there are enemies who cannot be reasoned with, cannot be negotiated with, and will not stop until everything you've built is consumed. Against such enemies, civilization itself becomes a luxury you cannot afford. A Corvan general stood up. What you're asking us to do? It changes who we are. It makes us into something we spent centuries trying not to be. Yes, Sarah agreed simply. It does. The question you have to ask yourselves is this. Would you rather change or would you rather be extinct? The council chamber fell silent. Outside the windows, the lights of the growing fleet twinkled like stars, each one representing a species that had chosen survival over philosophy. There's something else you need to understand, Sarah continued. This isn't just about defeating the collective. The galaxy is a big place, and there are other threats out there that you haven't encountered yet. There are species that view your peaceful civilizations as easy targets, regions of space where diplomacy is considered weakness, and empires that respect nothing but strength. She gestured to the display, which now showed the full extent of known space. For too long, your corner of the galaxy has been protected by distance and luck. That protection is gone now. You need guardians who can stand between you and the darkness, who can do the terrible things necessary to preserve what you've built. An elderly luminary representative, his energy form flickering with emotion, spoke up. And you believe humans should be these guardians? I believe humans are the only species in this galaxy that never forgot how to be guardians, Sarah replied. We maintained armies when everyone else chose diplomacy. We studied warfare when everyone else studied art and philosophy. We prepared for the worst-case scenario while everyone else assumed the best case would continue forever. She looked directly at the luminary. You asked us to evolve beyond violence. We tried, but the universe wouldn't let us. Every time we started to beat our swords into plowshares, something reminded us why we needed the swords in the first place. Today you should be grateful we were too stubborn to listen. The Council voted unanimously to accept the Human Defense Initiative as the military arm of galactic civilization. They granted humanity a permanent seat on the Council, full membership in galactic society, and authority over all matters relating to defense and security. But the most significant moment came after the formal session ended, when Admiral Kessitar found Sarah alone on the observation deck, watching the stars. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the Council had accepted humanity 50 years ago? He asked. Sarah considered the question. We probably would have integrated into galactic society, adopted your peaceful ways, dismantled our military, and learned to solve problems with discussion instead of violence. And the collective? would have consumed the entire galaxy without anyone capable of stopping them, she concluded. Sometimes rejection is the greatest gift you can receive. It forces you to remain what you truly are, instead of becoming what others think you should be. In the distance, a new ship was arriving from Earth, the UES Defiance II, twice the size of the original and bristling with weapons that incorporated both human ingenuity and alien technology. It was a symbol of what humanity had become. Not the peaceful species the galaxy had wanted them to be, but the dangerous guardians the galaxy had never known it needed. "The galaxy is safe," Kessitar observed. Sarah shook her head. "The galaxy is defended. There's a difference. Safety is an illusion. Defense is a choice we make every day, a promise we keep to those who can't keep it themselves." As the stars wheeled overhead, Captain Sarah Chen stood watch over a civilization that had learned, perhaps too late, that sometimes the most important question wasn't whether you could evolve beyond violence, but whether you could afford to. The galaxy had its guardians now, and they wore human faces.